everybody. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today. I'm so excited to dive in here. We are here to talk about values and vision in a mentoring relationship. And I think this is where we can really start to dive into the intentionality and the focus of our mentoring relationship. So we're meeting with other people within our company, and we're building this mentoring relationship. And this is the point in time, this Lunch and Learn is specifically about how we can really set that intention of what we want to get out of not only this mentoring relationship, but our careers at our company right now, and really how we can make the most out of it. We've got an awesome guest speaker with us today. We've got Andrea Butcher. Andrea is the president of HRD Advisory Group. Andrea has gained her extensive experience focusing on the growth and development of individuals, work teams, and leaders. Andrea, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be here, Garrett. What a great topic. Values and vision in a mentoring relationship. I'm ready to go.
That's exactly it. And to provide context, the participants who are in this mentoring relationship, they're all working for the same company and they're matched with each other. Maybe they're matched interdepartmentally, maybe they're matched with somebody within their department, but the goal is that they're able to build a strong bond, a strong rapport with them, and grow this relationship over time, even after the mentor experience within the specific mentoring program. So I think to get started, when we say values, what do we mean by that? What do you mean by values? What does it mean to set your values?
I think of the non-negotiables because for leaders, wherever the leader goes, there their values go. Regardless of situation or context, values gives you something to filter any situation through. So for me, I live by a set of core values: abundance, empowerment, service, integrity, and joy. And so regardless of where I am in any situation, I can ask, what would those values do right now? And I know that I'm going to show up in a way that I'll feel good about because that's authentic to who I am. So I think of those non-negotiables, wouldn't compromise it. That's who I am at my core.
And that's so critical. And I think this is sometimes we get lost in this. I think we see this often. I've seen this especially in our higher ed program, where we'll have students who graduate, they get a job offer, and it's for a bunch of money. And then they've got their own personal values, but they really haven't set their own intentionality around their value system. And they're thinking to themselves, wait, is this company aligned with my value system? And they're kind of at this own personal crisis. They haven't really set their value system yet. And I've seen it quite a bit, but I would imagine that a lot of professionals get into their careers and maybe they haven't set their own value system. So how do you suggest a professional go about setting their own value system? How do you suggest that they begin even consciously thinking about this?
Well, there's so many different ways. Just answering the question, what's really important to me, thinking back on challenging situations in your life, those pivotal moments. What was it that really drove your decision? Where was your heart? You can naturally see themes, but there's formal ways. There's card sorts. I don't know if you've ever seen the values cards, Garrett, but you can actually, if you go to Amazon and Google values card deck, multiple products will pop up.
Wow.
We use a YYYY product. YYYY has a leadership challenge model, and as a part of that model, there's a values card sort, and literally it's 48. It's a deck of 48 cards with different values written on them: trust, wisdom, family, integrity, truth, etc., etc. There's some blank cards, so if the word you're looking for isn't there, you can fill them in. But you can simply go through an exercise of sorting, this is really important, this, and this not at all. And ultimately get it down to, the encouragement is always no more than 5 core values, because you can name them on one hand and they're much more easily recallable if there's no more than 3 to 5.
I love that. So let's dive into that. I don't think everybody's got the YYYY list of values cards, but one thing you mentioned was what's important to you. You had your 5 values. What is the story behind each one of those values? I'd love to learn about that. I think this could be a fun exercise to showcase for the people in our mentoring relationships, because I think if they were to watch you go through this process for yourself, they could eventually do this with their own mentoring relationships and start to identify with their mentor what their core values are, which I think would be a fun exercise regardless.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, it's interesting. For me, there's a difference between values and core values. So across my life at different phases, different things have been important to me. But the things that have remained unchanged are my belief in abundance, which is my number one value. And that shows up, I mean, conversations like this, you know, the firm that I am a part of, we very much have an abundance mentality that not only is there enough work for everyone doing leader development, but the more coaches and the more leadership development professionals in this world, the better our world is. Empowerment is everyone has potential. Everyone has value and gifts to share. And I love being able to come alongside people and helping them to see those gifts and empower them to be the best versions of themselves. Service, in that life is meant to be of service. I came to help and to give and to share, and that service plays out in that way. Oh, go ahead.
I want to dive in there to even more specifically why. Like, I love to point to like a story. I think stories are so sticky. I think like when we're creating our values with our, like in our mentoring relationships, I think if we could like point to a specific story about why abundance or why service or why these values that you've laid out, why that's important. Like, I love to think about, like, I love to almost create some imagery for the participants watching this right now to think like, oh, this was Andrea's story. Okay, cool. I've got a similar story in my life that allows me to align with this value system or not this value system. And that might, I don't know, might give context. What do you think?
Well, there are so many stories. I mean, there are lots of things coming to mind. One of the stories that immediately comes to mind is in high school, I was in the guidance counselor's office one day, and there was a kid that I didn't know very well. And I knew that he was a kid that got in trouble a lot. That was about all I knew about him. I also thought he was kind of cute. And the guidance counselor was giving him a really hard time. And I could tell that he was anxious about something. And he said to the guidance counselor that he was thinking about going to college. And before he even finished the sentence, the guidance counselor shut him down and said, "No, I don't think that's for you. I would explore other paths." And without speaking, like without hesitating, I spoke up and said, like, "Well, did you not hear what he said? He just said he wanted to go to college. Like, aren't you supposed to help him explore that path? That's what he wants." So, I mean, just from a very young age, just wanting the best in people to be given an opportunity and possibilities to emerge there.
Yeah, I love that. So that would be service
and empowerment for certain.
Okay, cool. No, I like that. Okay, what are the other values?
Integrity and joy.
Okay, talk about that. Integrity and joy. Why is that important?
Well, integrity is doing the right thing even when it doesn't feel quite right, making tough choices, and speaking your truth even when your voice is trembling and you don't think that that's the popular thing to say in the moment. And joy, I would say, oh gosh. So in college, Garrett, my nickname was Fundria. Just bringing light and levity to situations. I tend to take things pretty serious at times. And so that value of joy just reminds me to be light about it.
I like that. I think that really helps. I think for those people participating in our mentor program, they might be thinking about their value system right now. I think yours are very well rehearsed, and I think you definitely came prepared for that. But is it all right if I come up with maybe like not necessarily the most personally, maybe politically correct value system, but like they are like true to me, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Well, again, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
And everyone, because I do believe the greatest gift a leader has to share is his or her uniqueness, the unique gifts that we bring. And so aren't our values a representation of that? The collective nature of those values makes us who we are. Sorry. Yeah, keep going. No, but like keep digging into it. Because it's interesting. So, you know, for over 20 years, I've been taking leaders through this values exercise, right? So for me, it's interesting. I did not know for certain that you were going to ask me about my values, but it's really important for me to model the way with that, you know, and to have a set of values. So I have this binder that I carry with me everywhere that's got my to-do, it's got my vision, it's got, you know, all the things. And at the top of it, the first thing are my core values as a visible reminder of what's important. So every week when I'm doing my weekly visioning and my weekly to-dos, I start with that core of who I am. There's a groundedness in that, particularly leading through challenging times, like a lot of leaders are in the midst of right now. Like we need something that this like immovable center. Like that's what I feel like my values bring for me, is because life can get really rocky and life can get really scary. But what I know to be true is abundance, empowerment, service, integrity, and joy. Like I can rest on those things. Even just saying that to you right now, like there's a comfort in that. Like, yeah, because I'm never going to be all things to all people, but I can always be more of those values.
That's a cool thing. And I think that's, I guess maybe the question I have is, why is this important? And I know I think these sound obvious, and I think like for a lot of people watching this, they might think like, yeah, every company I've ever been a part of has a core value statement and a mission statement, and you know, we've got all these jargony things, but why is this important on an individual basis? Why should this matter?
Well, and so this goes to your earlier question about like, what if mine are not so, okay, I don't really think it matters what you come up with. I think it's doing the work and having the foundation, right? It doesn't even, when I lead leaders through the exercise, it's not the outcome of the exercise that's so important. It's peeling back the layers and exploring. There's an interesting exercise I've taken leaders through as a part of this process where I ask them to think about the peaks and the valleys in their life, and then to look across those experiences and to identify the common themes or the common emotions that pop up, because you can find your values in both the peaks and the valleys. A lot of times those valley situations were contrary to our values, or there was a value that we didn't show up in that. And so we don't that didn't play out so well for us because of that.
Yeah, that's it. That's meat right there. That's like a nugget of wisdom. That's gold. So I'm even thinking about this for myself. I'm thinking, even if I were to do this exercise, I don't know if I'd have all 5 of them right there, but I mean, I think for me, as someone who has made a lot of mistakes and has gotten into a lot of trouble, and I think I've shared my story with a lot of the people who are viewing this right now, in terms of my own vulnerability, but I'd say for me, it's probably resilience. Even when things are good, I'm still always pushing to try to, I guess, be better. And especially when things are not good, I know I won't abandon ship just because of some inclement weather, to stay with the metaphor, which I think that I feel like is very true to me. And I think that like everybody watching this could think of a story of a time that something didn't happen to them. So something happened to them that didn't go great, and it wasn't the way that they had planned it. And those feelings, that growth, that adversity, and how they handled the adversity, I feel like that's where the value system come in. That's where you really kind of peel back that layer. So I thought that could be a really cool exercise to do between mentor pairings, is to share a story of when something didn't go your way. Yes. And how you handle that adversity. I think you can you pull your value systems out of how you handle that situation.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, those critical incidents. It's such a practical application of our values, for certain.
So if we don't have a massive binder to carry around with us everywhere we go, what are some other ways that we can be intentional about staying true to our values? Because I could easily see, I know one thing I highly value is vulnerability. And I can recall a time, like when I was building Ambition in Motion, I was so much focused on this underdog story of how I'm a former drug dealer who fortunately got an opportunity. I had 5 felony distribution charges, and eventually I was able to kind of reinvent myself and and be able to build ambition and motion from there. But then after I started building it, I almost felt this facade of like I had to live up to this CEO or founder type of position that I thought everyone was expecting of me, and not actually staying true to myself of where the business was. And I always felt obligated that I needed to tell everybody that everything was going great or amazing or that it was going perfect. And I don't know, eventually got to a point where I could be okay with saying the truth of, these are things that are going well. These are things that are going not so well. And this is kind of where I sit on that. But I kept finding myself, before I got to that level of comfort doing that, I was not staying true to my own values to the point that it got uncomfortable for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Well, and good awareness on your part that you felt that. I think that's the key, right? Is that something is off here. Something is off here. And what's interesting is a lot of the times we point to the circumstances or the situation or what someone else is doing, but that feeling is coming from within us. So like in your story, like you noticed something is off here. Our guts are smart. They know when something's off and we're not showing up in a way that doesn't feel great to us.
How can we kind of see if we're on this wrong track before it gets to the point that we're like uncomfortable? Like physically, I became uncomfortable. Eventually, It got to the point where I was like, why am I being uncomfortable? It's because I wasn't being fully vulnerable with people.
I think it takes a lot of courage, doesn't it, to be paying attention to how we're feeling. It also takes quiet time and reflection time. If we're caught up in the busyness of our day or the world and we're inundating ourselves with information, there's no headspace for that awareness.
That's fascinating. And I think that plays really well. We do a 360-degree assessment with our participants in the mentor program. And I think that's where we can get some really cool breakthroughs, because that's where we can start to see like where our gaps are versus what like our colleagues think of me. And are there areas that I might not be as strong as I think I am, or that people think I'm stronger than I actually think I am, and maybe I've got a confidence issue, or somewhere obviously in between that. But I think that kind of plays all into that of, are we doing that self-audit, that self-check-in of where are we at with ourselves and our value system, and are we living true to that? Are we communicating that? And are we having a firm understanding of who we are and what we're putting out to the world?
Yes. And then what you name them becomes irrelevant. And so this is, if I could go back and start over and you asked me that question, I wish I would have said like, well, my 5 values don't really matter to anybody else. Like the key is that I know what they are. I'm reflecting on them, right? I'm thinking about them. And it's interesting. I mentioned earlier, the different phases of my life. So I have this practice of doing that exercise pretty regularly with participants just to see, like, do those same 5 emerge? And so joy has sometimes been called connection. And there was a time in my life where I really focused on love as the overarching theme. And so it doesn't matter what you call it. It's the reflection time. It's doing exactly what you described, like thinking about, am I showing up in a way that is aligned with who I am? And do I even know what that is? Am I giving myself the space to reflect on and think about who I am and who I want to be? Because sometimes it's interesting to pull in an aspirational value where I'd really like to have more joy in my life. And so I'm going to value that and really reflect on how I can bring more joy into my life. It's fun. It's what I love about the whole thought process is it's so empowering. We get to choose how to show up in every situation, don't we? That's one of those, it's one of those really empowering truths that we often fail to recognize, that regardless of circumstance, situation, like we get to choose. And so that's where, for me, the most valuable part of the value set is being able to say, like, what would this set of values, what would joy do in this situation?
I get it. That was a nugget of wisdom. We get to choose how we show up, which I think maybe for some people watching this sounds really meta, like, okay, yeah, sure, we get to choose how we show up. But I think so often, and I'm guilty of this too, I kind of go through my days just like I'm going through it. I'm going through the day. I'm letting the day kind of hit me. But on days where I actually can like take some time, sit and think about, how do I want people to perceive me today? How do I want others to interact with me today? And how do I want them to view me? If I actually just take a second to think about it, I can be conscious of it. And if I'm conscious of it, I can do what I can to physically convey that. And if I'm not, it could cause me to deviate. It could cause me to kind of almost be reactive to other people's feelings or thoughts, or kind of their body language for a given day, or their tonality with their voice, or whatever's going on with their day. And that potentially holds me hostage. It makes me think of, and I know this is a weird example, but it makes me think of when I was a kid. My grandma would always ask me like, "Oh, Garrett, what'd you learn today?" And I'd say something stupid like, "Oh, nothing." And she'd be like, "No, you can't eat dinner until you tell me something you learned today." And that made me focus intentionally on what I had learned. And once I shared that with her, what was fascinating was that bit of information always stuck in my head for so much longer, because it forced me to recall it and actually like recite it and teach it to my grandma. And I think this is something that we can leverage even with our daily lives of how do we want to show up for a given day of work? How do we want to come into that work day? I think if we ask ourselves, that could be a practice that we potentially implement in our mentor meetings. Before we go into a mentor meeting, how do we want to show up for this mentor meeting? Ask ourselves this. Before we jump into the actual conversation, ask ourselves, how do we want to show up to this mentor meeting? Or if we're about to go into a sales call, or if we're about to go into a group meeting with our team, how do we want to show up? That could be a great question to set the tone and prime yourself for actually delivering on that. Or if you don't, you might be essentially a chameleon to whatever everybody else is doing around you.
Yeah, it's the difference between living by default and living by design. It's also
the why.
Yeah, it's also used because you started this with values and vision, and I love talking about values and vision in combination because they're all about setting the foundation. They're all about intentionality, and the combination of those things is so powerful because it's who I am and where am I going. And ultimately, I get to choose. I get to choose how I show up and where I'm going. So good. So good.
So what is vision? How is vision different from values?
Yeah, so I think about vision just naming the future, shaping the future. The future is going to come whether we like it or not. Might as well shape it. I'm doing a lot of work right now around the future of HR because I've noticed a lot of our clients were coming to me like, "What do you think it's going to look like after all this?" And, well, what do we want it to be? Leaders shape the future. Let's name it. Why not?
And leaders don't actually have to be in title. Leaders can be in any role within the company. You lead.
Good point.
You being a leader is almost like a state of being. It's not necessarily based on your title or your accolades.
I think of leadership as synonymous with influence. Anyone who's influencing anything is leading something.
So true.
The root of the word lead is to go, to guide, to travel. So you're moving somewhere. So think about that. If the root of the word is to go or to guide, inherent in that is vision. So where are we going?
So how does vision differ from goals? And how do goals play into that? And I think like you could say, well, you know what? I want to play in the NBA. That could be my vision. It's probably not likely to happen. I think it would be super cool. I love playing basketball, but I think how can we find that happy balance of staying realistic, setting an aspirational vision, and keeping ourselves on track with that? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Well, a vision doesn't have to be accomplishable. It's a vision, and visions shift and change. And there's a great story about the first amputee to ever make it to the top of Mount Rainier. And so hiking to the summit of Mount Rainier is an accomplishment for anyone, but for an amputee, it's quite an accomplishment. And he was interviewed, Don Bennett was his name, and he was interviewed and asked, tell us about your process. And he started with his vision. Every day I saw myself standing at the summit of the mountain. Like that was my vision. And I held on to that. I wanted that so badly. And then he went to work, setting all the goals, assembling his team, figuring out his path. And then ultimately he says, and then I just started hopping. And one hop at a time, with all of the plans I'd put in place, I've eventually accomplished my vision. So that's when you were talking about vision and goals, that was the story that came to mind for me. I mean, isn't that, so we chart a course. My grandpa always used to say, because I was such a dreamer growing up and I wanted to be an astronaut and always coming up with these big things. And he always said, it's not enough to stare up the steps. You actually have to step up the stairs. So the stepping up the stairs, I see that as the execution, the plan, the goals, whatever you call it, to get to that longer term vision that I aspire to. But, and I want to just say real quickly, I have no answers around any of this, right? I often speak with so much passion and so much conviction that it sounds like I do, but I don't. I have experiences, right, that drive my passion and conviction. But I just wanted to say that.
I appreciate that humility. And that I think is a notion for anything. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution in any scenario one may be in. But here's something that somebody else has found. It's kind of like there's a saying, success leaves clues. So I think that's a very much relevant to just kind of what you're saying. It's like, hey, I'm not saying I know the answer to your scenario, but this is how I found it to be successful. And if you take a bit of nuggets or a clue from that and leverage it for your own personal situation, you might be able to find something that works for you. But that what you're talking about makes a lot of sense, and it's very fascinating because it gets me back to the mentor relationship. How can our mentors help us stay accountable to this vision and these values that we've set for ourselves without being hurtful? Like, I think that I've seen scenarios where you've got one side of the mentorship coin where someone's very accountable and he or she will say something like, hey, like, I don't know if you were living up to that value that you had stated for yourself when you did XYZ thing. And I think when you say something like that, immediate reaction is defensiveness, is like, whoa, this is my value. How are you to tell me that I'm not living up to my value? But what is a way that I can effectively broach that conversation of accountability without offending somebody and not garnering a defensive response?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is it goes back to the initial building of the relationship and taking the time to establish shared values, shared vision, because then we've got some commonality, but also in that conversation, we recognize what each person is bringing to the conversation. So that, for me, that just naturally helps to mitigate that situation that you just described. Or at least when those tension points pop up, we've got a foundation to go back to.
That's a good point. I just think like the alternative on the total other side, which also happens quite frequently, is the wishy-washy, where they're like, oh, you didn't hit your goal, or, whatever, so be it. It's like, if you're not actually invested in your mentor achieving what he or she would like to achieve, you're not helping them push, and you're not necessarily helping push them to get them to where they would like to go either.
Absolutely. Yes. Good point. So it provides direction. It provides direction and focus and accountability. And without it, it is wishy-washy, and it's just conversation without direction, conversation without growth.
So if I'm hearing you right, the key focus is finding the commonalities between both you and your mentor, and being willing to kind of almost do like a self-audit of, do you feel like you've been able to hit your value system? Almost like doing a self-assessment, as opposed to calling them out and saying, hey, I don't think you're actually hitting your goals. Ask them, are you hitting your goals? And the more specific and tangible that they are, the more clear you can have a self-assessment of whether or not you actually hit it. And then you can have a conversation about why not and how you can go about hitting it for the next month.
Yes, I like that. And in addition to, because you said the key, is identifying those commonalities, I would also say alignment around values and vision is so important, that we get each other's perspectives on that. We're aligned in how we're thinking about our values and our vision. That alignment is so helpful. So we're starting the relationship in that way, because that way we're going down the same path together.
I like it.
It's a little different kind of relationship, but my husband and I have a 10-year vision, and we were married on January the 2nd. And so every January 2nd, as a part of our anniversary, we look at our vision, we set goals for the upcoming year aligned with that vision. And I will tell you, so many times throughout our relationship, when we hit challenging points, we go back to that. Let's reaffirm who we are and where we're going together, what we're co-creating together. So similarly, in a mentoring relationship, what are we co-creating? What are we working towards? That can alleviate a lot of challenges.
That's fascinating. That's cool. Well, Andrea, this has been a really interesting and great workshop and Lunch and Learn today. How can our audience learn more about you and connect with you?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. Andrea Butcher. I put out a lot of content around leadership and coaching and mentoring. And we also have, we have a podcast called Being at Work. I interview weekly a CEO or an executive sharing a pivotal moment, a story in which they learned something about themselves as leaders. But I also put out a daily dose of leadership. So these are short snippets, 2 to 3 minutes, just providing encouragement and support to leaders, because who doesn't need a little encouragement and support, especially right now?
So true. That's awesome. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for being here for this Lunch and Learn. This has been great. Thank you. And by the way, everyone, thank you for being here for this Lunch and Learn. Have a good rest of your day. See you.